Greetings, and welcome to another episode of Real Talk with Dr. Steve Gallon III. I'm very excited to have my special guest here today, who is no stranger to the Miami-Dade County Public Schools, who is no stranger to this community, but more importantly, he's no stranger to advocating on behalf of issues for our youth, issues of equity, opportunity, and access for members of this community. I'm very honored today to have a lifelong public servant in the person of Dr. Marcus Bright. Dr. Bright is renowned nationally, and we're very grateful to have him here in our community as he has spoken across this state and across this country around issues relative to equity, access, inclusion, but more importantly, the education and empowerment of youth. But with no further ado, I want to present to some and introduce to others Dr. Marcus Bright, who will also tell us about some of the great things that are happening at the Miami-Dade Economic Advisory Trust. That is an entity here in Miami-Dade County that we're very blessed to have that provides tremendous services for children, youth, and families throughout this community. Welcome, Dr. Bright.
Dr. Gallon, thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure, pleasure. How you been doing?
Been grateful, blessed, incredibly fortunate to be here in Miami-Dade County with so much going on, challenges, but also a tremendous amount of opportunity.
Yeah, I'm no stranger to sharing the stage and sharing the platform with you, Dr. Bright. I must say, parenthetically, and on a personal note, it's always been a privilege to share the stage, to share the podium, to really lean into opportunities to pour into our youth, to our community, around critically important issues around education, empowerment, economics. And I mean, you have been a very quiet but very powerful voice. And I know that may sound oxymoronic, because how can one be powerful and silent? You move in silence, but your impact is tremendously felt. We miss you here in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools, as you have been a very, very dedicated employee, and you have really poured into the learning and lives of so many youth. But I know that Miami-Dade County Economic Advisory Trust is fortunate to have you. And again, you're right down the street. We still stand shoulder to shoulder in a similar mission. So tell us about your new transition and what you're doing at the Miami-Dade Economic Advisory Trust. But before you do that, if you don't mind, I know who you are. If people want to know, they can look you up, they can read your latest book. I mean, tell us about Dr. Marcus Bright. I define you as an advocate, as an author, as an intellectual, and again, as a tremendously powerful father. Fatherhood is very important as we just come on the heels of celebrating fathers across this country. But just give us a brief introduction into your background for the viewers, please.
Well, I've held a number of different roles in education, in nonprofit, in advocacy. Taught at 5 universities: FIU, FAU, Lynn University, University of Massachusetts Amherst, and the City University of New York, Medgar Evers College in public administration. I used to be the executive director of a nonprofit organization called Education for a Better America, which is the sister organization to the National Action Network. Been an administrator at 2 universities, spent 4 years as the administrator for the 5,000 Role Models of Excellence Project under the leadership of the great Congresswoman Frederica Wilson. And recently, for about a year now, I've been the Youth Services Administrator for the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust, which is a part of the Miami-Dade County government under the leadership of Mr. Bill Diggs. And the agency overall has 4 different divisions: housing, economic development, youth services, and research. I'm over youth services. Our main targets have been a teen court program, which is an alternative sanctioning program for first-time offenders, giving them a second chance, but then also providing a legal career pathway in terms of them getting real-time experience with cases, being jurors, being attorneys, being bailiffs, being the clerk, but then also having a way for young people to avoid the criminal justice system. And then we built out over the past year a career pathways program, providing exposure and connectivity for young people, trying to merge them, include them, prepare them for the economic prosperity of the future. As we know, we are facing escalating cost of living prices here. We are sprinting towards San Francisco or New York type housing environment and housing prices. So it is an economic imperative that we prepare our young people specifically in higher wage industries like tech, like healthcare, like law, like business and entrepreneurship. And so that's been the main focus of my efforts in the last year.
Great, great. Shout out to our brother Bill Diggs, who has been leaning in this community in terms of leadership, in terms of service. Always grateful for the impact that he continues to make, and very, very glad to now have him at the helm of the Miami-Dade Economic Advisory Trust. For those who don't know what MDEAT represents, it has a long-standing history in this community. Obviously, it has evolved in terms of its programs, but it's evolved in terms of even its name. Can you share with the viewers just the history of MDEAT? How did it come to be? I know the history, having been a member of the board initially before I got elected. I actually had to resign from the board of MDEAT when I ran for the school board. But obviously, we share a common mission. But for those who are not familiar with MDEAT and its history and its origins, can you please kind of share with the viewers what MDEAT represents?
Yeah, it was founded in 1983 in the aftermath of the McDuffie riots here. And it was really a focused and intentional effort, and its mission is unique. Its mission is to ensure the equitable participation of blacks in Miami-Dade County economic growth. And so from there, it's transitioned into a specific focus on economic advocacy. And I like to say, I pay attention to the mission. It says to ensure. It didn't say to suggest. It didn't say to ask, but it says to ensure. And so that gives us an articulated authority to advocate freely and for economic parity in our community. And I think that it is critical. I think that we are at an inflection point here in Miami-Dade County. It's almost a now or never moment, I believe, in terms of us being able to economically afford to be here for the long term. And so we really have to put a flag down here to ensure that people are prepared to walk through the doors of opportunity, but we also have to be there to help to open up the doors of opportunity so that we have equity and access and economic inclusion.
You talked about 1983 with its origins, and for those young people uninformed, in 1980 was the McDuffie riots. We saw tremendous destruction and devastation, in some cases, regretfully, at our own hands, but within our own communities. But what people very seldom understand is that many of the businesses that were regretfully destroyed were not actually black-owned businesses. They were located in the black community, but they did provide some level of economics for the black community. But that was an opportunity to make some, I hate to use the word reparations, or some provisions for economic development within the black community that was destroyed, and really to square some of the high levels of emotions that went with those circumstances that led to the eruption with the loss of Arthur McDuffie and so many other incidents of violence and crime against blacks, sometimes self-inflicted, but nonetheless those ills and vices that manifested itself in the pockets of the urban core. On the heels of the riots, obviously, we had the crack epidemic, and it just became so much on the black community from a social, from an educational, and obviously from an economic standpoint. Looking at that as the mission in 1983, that was the mission then, it's still the mission now. What strides have we taken? What outcomes can we measure? Because you did say with the level of punctuation, with a level of emphasis, that it is not to suggest or to recommend, it is to ensure. What have we achieved, and what should we be looking at as the metric? Not just the North Star. North Star says where we're trying to get, but how do we know to some extent have we gotten there in a measurable, tangible way as it relates to the economic circumstances of Black Miami?
Well, ironically, I was born in 1983 in a small town called Martin, Tennessee. I'm the first generation in my family not to pick cotton. And my grandfather, he was very industrious. He taught school. He hauled what they call hands to the cotton fields, but he bought a plot of land called Simmons Circle. And when it was time for one of his five children to go to college, go to Tennessee State, he would sell a plot of that land. And so for me, Simmons Circle represents sacrifice, it represents vision, it represents a plan for the future. And so I believe that what you're doing at the school board, with the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust, and other entities in this community represent for me is a Simmons Circle, is a way out. To address the economic question now, I think that as we look forward, certainly the numbers don't look good from we're number one and we're number one or number two in terms of economic inequality in the nation, and that may be a surprise to some viewers from outside of Miami-Dade County who may come here to vacation. But there's almost a tale of two cities, and so but in the last 2 years, really led I think by City of Miami Mayor Francis Suarez, we've seen a tech boom come here. Silicon Valley, we didn't land on Silicon Valley, but Silicon Valley has landed on us, and we are now number one in America in tech job sector growth, number one in tech job sector migration, which means that a lot of folks are coming out of town here to take jobs because we may not be prepared to be able to step into some of those roles. And so so what I think it means from the standpoint of youth development is that in order to position ourselves to be gainfully employed and gainfully prosperous in this economy, I think we have to go sector by sector. And in an agency, we are one agency, but we have a limited bandwidth, and so we've chosen to really focus in from a youth services standpoint on this tech sector. So it's one thing I think to take children on field trips, and we've been able to do it to expose them to certain career paths and what is an engineer and what is software development. But we have to. When they come back to the school sets, do we have the infrastructure and the systems in place for them to be able to gain some of those skill sets? And when during a survey of the industry, I said, what is the most valuable skill set right now in terms of being able to currency in this new economy? And the feedback has been the ability to code and computer science. And a lot of our schools did not have a computer science program in their schools, so we've been trying to bolster those, or to initiate where it's not there, and then to bolster some emerging programs like Northwestern and Central. They just got the Microsoft Teals program, so we're working with that cohort of students to be able to provide context to the content. So if I tell you to go outside and go tackle this person, or go run some sprints, or go do some agilities, you'll say, no, I'm good on that. But if you put the context of football and the incentive, the social and economic incentives in terms of scholarships, in terms of social status, in terms of the ability to potentially get a pro contract, then you say, oh, okay, I see the context. It's worth it for me to now go through the skill building process. And so we're trying to develop a parallel infrastructure of opportunities similar to what we've done in football, because we've mentioned some of the challenges in terms of economics, but we produce the best football players in the world here in South Florida. The national champions are Central, a public school in Miami, Miami Central Senior High School. It blows my mind that they're number one versus a lot of private schools that recruit nationally and have multi NFL-like training facilities, and Central doesn't have that, but still we're able to produce the number one football team in the country. So I believe that we have a blueprint, we have a system that we can replicate, and we can identify. We put a pilot program in place in Arlington Heights Elementary School where we put it in the Google software engineer. I said, what do we need to be learning? He said, they can learn JavaScript. He put a program called Scratch in there, and then we got a computer science student from the University of Miami to come in there and teach it. So they're doing that. We quietly are doing that in Arlington Heights Elementary School. Put the same system in the magnet program at Horace Mann Middle School. We want to try to build some longitudinal pipelines similar to what we've done in football, from the Optimist Club to Gwen Cherry Park, to Liberty City Warriors, and then up to Northwestern, up to Central. We want to be able to build a parallel system in tech and in other industries, not just tech, but in other industries as well. And so the programming that we've been able to do from an exposure standpoint has not been to try to supplement what the schools are already doing, but just to highlight, to complement what they're doing. So, for example, in Norland, they already have a sports medicine program. So we try to bring in some healthcare professionals to do some role modeling and to bolster them, to provide some examples. At Central, and at Northwestern, where they're just starting computer science, we brought in computer software engineer from Google. We brought in brothers from Microsoft. We brought in folks from Facebook so that they could see it, so that they aren't just learning a program called Python, but not have the context around it. And so I think building these kind of these career pathways, these infrastructures of opportunity, exposing them early so that it makes sense what they're learning, and they're able to lean into it, to move into it with the same kind of intensity and passion and same kind of community support, hopefully, that we support football with.
One would say, and this this is real talk. I don't mince words on this show. I'm very honored and humbled to even have the platform that can be very transparent and very direct. And I'll tell you, it's always an increased level of engagement and excitement to have an intellectual such as yourself here to really be able to square the intellectual aspect with the real advocacy on the ground. My late father would say, start where you are, use what you can, and use what you have, and do what you can. When I look at what's described in terms of the youth services component, albeit critically important areas, when we start talking about where we are in terms of a community and where we need to go, we have a heavy lift. Mm-hmm. And as you indicated and you conceded to, in that particular space, MD doesn't necessarily have the full bandwidth mm-hmm. to be the panacea for all that challenges our students, our community, and our future, and that we must have stronger relationships, stronger collaborations to be able to leverage your expertise, your capacity, your mission, and reinforce what the school system is doing and is attempting to do. We obviously are facing some major transition in education accountability structures. We understand some of the challenges our students have with low literacy rates, and we also recognize that many times these challenges are more pronounced in urban centers in certain zip codes. So we have a heavy lift, but one would ask, how do we, or what should we be doing to accelerate improvement, enhancements, and opportunities in these particular spaces? We are dealing with a right now community, a right now society. And very often we hear people lament that if you look at 1983, for example, we're talking 40 years later, and we have not necessarily moved the needle in the school system. We are having a significant conversation and discourse around economic parity that came on the heels of our construction program, our procurement program, and that was grounded and legally protected through a disparity study. But we still find that although we represent over 20+% of the demographics in this community, we're still getting less than 5% of contracts through the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. So we have a ways to go. Dr. Martin Luther King would say previously, we cannot get lulled to sleep or intoxicated by this notion of gradualism. Mm-hmm. So how do we accelerate these things? Because we will be on to the next generation, which obviously we are, and we're having some of the same conversations. And what you indicated is that with the demands of the sector here, what has landed on Miami-Dade County is regretfully somewhat synonymous to what happened in 1619, where certain people landed in certain places, and the people who were already there were either not able to, not prepared to, or were not allowed to take full advantage of those opportunities. So where we have people coming in, that has obviously exacerbated some other issues. It exacerbated traffic. Mm-hmm. It exacerbated the cost of living. Mm-hmm. It exacerbated housing affordability, because people come in historically from other parts of the country and other parts of the world, and they put tremendous strains on the economic engine of opportunity, the economic engine of opportunity for people who have sowed seeds, that were born, raised, lived, and will die here. So how do we accelerate that from an awareness campaign, from an accountability campaign, and from a collaborative campaign? How do we do that with MDEED as a school system, but more so, even MDEED in the school system alone can't solve this particular problem? How do you envision us having a broader conversation around these issues that we're sitting here talking about, and a conversation that leads to more viable, measurable, and intentional solutions?
Yeah, I think that we need a reinstallation of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s last campaign around economic justice and Operation Breadbasket. We need an Operation Breadbasket-like effort here in Miami-Dade County. What's that? About 500 pastors were organized. It began in Philadelphia, and then Dr. King took it to Atlanta. Jesse Jackson really spearheaded it in Chicago. But that is highlighting exactly what you said. What percentage of black companies are getting contracts with the school district? What percentage are getting contracts with the county? Continue to uplift and to highlight those, but not just stopping there at the public sector. I mentioned if we're number one in tech job sector growth and tech job sector migrations, what is the diversity data of all the companies that have in many times been incentivized to come in here with public dollars? So if I'm in the public and I'm not getting a piece of the economic prosperity, I'm incentivizing, I'm paying for my own removal. I'll be transparent. I felt the reason why, and my background is not in tech, but I said I need to pay attention to what's going on because they took me up $1,000 on my rent, and I had to talk them down to $1,000, and that's pretty common. There are people that have had their rent taken up $2,000 and $3,000, and like you said, it threatens the social safety net because people who provide viable services aren't going to be able to afford to live here if we don't demand accountability. So as much as we celebrate companies coming in, as much as we celebrate this being the new Silicon Valley, as much as we celebrate the economic growth and all of the towers, we have to demand equity and we have to demand inclusion and continue to raise up and highlight those numbers. At the same time, we have to prepare businesses, prepare people to step into the opportunity. But many people are already prepared and don't have the opportunity. So I think that we need a door opening committee. As much as we have education committees and we're trying to build up businesses, we need a door opening committee to knock on the doors. What is the percentage? What are your diversity numbers? And they'll say, oh, we can't find any black firms. We need to have you considered X, Y? Have you considered X, Y, and Z in a fair way?
Yeah.
In a fair way.
How we're facing the conundrum of politics that obviously across this country and obviously in some cases across the state that actually has given way to a rising tide against inclusion, against equity, against expanded opportunities. So we're at a crossroads here, I believe, in this nation, and obviously it trickles down to what happens around the corner in neighborhoods where this whole notion of equity and inclusion may not be fully embraced from a political standpoint. So we don't talk politics here. Definitely we don't talk partisan politics, but we definitely talk about the politics of economics, the politics of access, the politics of justice. And you're correct. Dr. King said one of the most significant issues of justice is economics. So we're pushing against that particular reality and those levels of division relative as opposed to those increasing levels of inclusion. How do we work together, in your estimation, to fight against that? Not fight against, to continue to fight for. Because I always tell people on either side of an issue, I'm not against anything, I'm for something. So I'm for parity, I'm for inclusion, I'm for diversity, I'm for equity, I'm for opportunity.
Yeah, I think that we have to look at where we have leverage. And you brought up Dr. King, his last speech at the Mason Temple, April 3rd, 1968 in Memphis. This is not Bright. This is Dr. King. He called for an economic boycott of certain companies in Memphis. He told the congregation, don't buy Coca-Cola, don't buy Wonder Bread, don't buy Heart's Bread. We have to look at where do we have leverage. I don't want to necessarily broadcast the whole playbook, but we can look at where we have leverage. And I alluded to sports. I alluded to, there have been, voices saying that they don't want diversity, equity, and inclusion in higher education. If you don't want it on campus, maybe you shouldn't have it on the football field.
Absolutely.
Like things like that. We have to see value beyond sports and entertainment. Look at where we have leverage, and have the courage to go for it.
You know, a lot of times we've not seen things change in society. We've not seen things change in humanity by simple, kind whispers and requests. Dr. Rudy Crew, former superintendent, wrote a book, and in the book he had a chapter that talked about demand parents, where parents no longer can request, we have to demand what we want for our children. And I think when we start talking about these particular issues of equity and access and opportunity across this country, across this community, there needs to be a coordinated demand for these things. And to your point, leverage is critically important, but to leverage strategically, you have to have collaboration, you have to have communication, and you have to have coordination. Yeah. So when you start looking at those things that Dr. King and those did that were successful, and things that quite frankly people did across the country and other countries that really gave birth to revolutions that brought forth democracy, that brought forth opportunity, they were done through coordinated efforts and collaboration, and we stand at the ready to collaborate. Me personally, as the school board member and a longstanding member of this community, as a school district that is committed to all children in all homes and all zip codes from Florida City to County Line Road, to entities such as MDEED that is committed to a similar mission of opening up doors of opportunity for our youth, our children, and improving our future. Now, before we wrap up, what would you like to see three things happen in the next 6 to 12 months around these particular issues of coordinating around those efforts that you're speaking of with the Miami-Dade County Public Schools, with community agencies, or what have you? What are three tangible, measurable things you would like to see happen and you think that will move us further along?
I would like to see computer science in all of our schools, from an and not just computer science, but looking at the infrastructures that we have in place. Are we set up from an infrastructure standpoint to be prepared to accelerate economically? And that there's an infrastructure bill. You know, are we getting our piece of the $64 billion, for example, that are coming in for broadband equity? Are we included in that? And then I like to see, I'll call it inspiration in my book. The book is called Brighter Ways Forward: Reflections on Sports, Tech, and Socioeconomic Mobility. There's an 8-part inspiring tech series. So we have to I would like to see I don't want to call it as you call it, an inspiration committee, but it is inspiring people to, after you have the infrastructure in place, we then have to inspire people to be able to take advantage of the vehicles, of the systems that are in place, so that and to put the belief in their minds and to see themselves, to see a pathway. So much of the violence in our communities stems from a sense of hopelessness. The pathway can provide hope. We need to constantly be inspiring people of all ages to be able to navigate and understand that you have to change and adapt and to move into some of these new vehicles. And then a real committee on door opening committee in terms of getting diversity data or getting data from the public and private sector in terms of employment, in terms of contracts, in terms of workforce participation, procurement, and actually putting some targets as much as we legally can, formal or informal targets, and then holding people's feet to the fire.
Yeah, we just had that recently. I've been a strong proponent of data. In God we trust, all others bring data. Data is indisputable. Data speaks to truth. And data resonates with people who don't understand the levels of details around a particular issue. And data drives the discussion in a very impartial, inclusive, and fair way. So I'm an advocate for that. I think the public sector obviously has an obligation to provide that data. Miami-Dade County Public Schools has been instrumental in leading the way, and that data is what gives us a sense of increased urgency that we have a ways to go. Without the data, we wouldn't know where we are to see where we need to go. But definitely, we look forward to doing that. I'm not going to let you glaze over that book. I want you to tell us about that your book. Very excited. I want to thank you for a copy of it. Outstanding body of work. As an author myself, So proud of you, so proud of what you represent to this community, what you represent, quite frankly, to this country, and what you represent to humanity. But tell us about the book, and where can people?
Well, I mean, the book is really an action book. And so even in the initiatives that we've been speaking about, how to leverage the infrastructure of sports and tech into socioeconomic mobility. Now, I left one thing out as it pertains to the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust. And we have a special program coming up May 23rd. We're bringing in a tremendous author by the name of Kristen Henning, who wrote a book called Rage of Innocence, How America Criminalizes Black Youth. And we speak about data points. The research arm of the agency is partnering with the University of Miami on a report involving arrest practices for youth in Miami-Dade County. Preliminary, this is the preliminary findings. I'm gonna leak a little bit of it because this part has to be addressed. Black males represent, ages 10 through 24, represent 9% of the population here in Miami-Dade County. 53% of the arrests in that same population. 9%, 53%. And so we want a concentrated effort, and we're trying to be a part of the solution. We're initiating a student court program. We're piloting it this semester at Miami Norland. Hopefully it expands to be able to prevent some of the out of school suspensions. But I think that a holistic look at that, a look at how particularly going by the data, black youth are targeted by law enforcement agencies, targeted even by disproportionately in terms of aggressive disciplinary action within schools. But taking a look at that and then really formulating some real solutions.
One of the things we did, I was very, very proud to lead that in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools. To your point, I led a policy adoption. We have a policy in the Miami-Dade County Public Schools that I led that was unanimously supported by the board, in which we look at our arrest data by demographic and subgroups on an annual basis. And to your point, where we represent a certain percentage of the overall population of the students in the district, African Americans represented more than double the percentage of students that were arrested. So that data helps us to drive the discussion, helps us to get to where we need to go. And again, we're looking forward to partnering with you to mitigate some of these issues. And as a lifelong educator myself, I've seen too often the criminalization of school behavior, and we have to continue to chip away at that. As we prepare to close, I always ask my guests to give a shout out. But before you do, give a shout out to whoever you want to give a shout out to. And in your closing remarks, I want you to tell the viewers how they can get more information about MDEED and the things that you're doing.
Well, I want to give a shout out. I recently got married April 11th to my wife, Angelina.
Congratulations.
And I want to give a shout out to my son, Marcus Al. You mentioned fatherhood at the beginning, and it is, his primary residence is in New York. So it is a challenge, for me to be there physically. But I want, him to know whenever he watches this that your dad loves you, and I will always love you and do all that I can for you. And I'm proud of you. So that is, my number one. Shouts out my wife Angelina, my son Marcus Al, and certainly the entire staff at the Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust.
And how can they learn more about it? Phone number, website information you want to share?
You can go to the Miami-Dade County website. Just type in MDEED, Miami-Dade Economic Advocacy Trust. You can find out. You can reach out to me, marcus.bright@miamidade.gov. If you're a young person and you want to be involved in the teen court program, they have court, a real live court, every Tuesday at 5 p.m. at the South Dade Justice Center, every Wednesday either at Miami Garden City Hall or North Dade Justice Center, and then on Thursdays either virtually or at the Richard Gerstein Justice Courthouse.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bright. It's a pleasure. I regret that we didn't have more time. I'm excited about maybe having a part 2 around having some of these intellectual discussions, and really not just discussions, but coming up with action-oriented plans about how we can move this community forward in all sectors, in all zip codes, for all families, but most importantly for all children, something that you've been committed to do your entire life, and I want to thank you. And I want to give a shout out to my community. I mean, the love, the prayers, the thoughts, the full level of support that you continue to demonstrate toward me, my leadership, my service, and what we're doing collectively as a community has not gone unnoticed. And I want to just thank you and give a shout out to you. And I want to thank you for the love and for always keeping it real. So until next time, we go keep it real. Thank you.
I've been on a vibe kinda hard to describe. I'm in between, I'm good and it's fine, but I'm tired of the grind. Then I come alive in the night to realize I'm in the middle of the time of my life. I'm never so packed for the stack.